Welcome to another episode of Alignment First. I've got the honor and the pleasure of jamming with Dr. Lance Cutsforth, founder of Mons Sana, an Army veteran. Brother, let's cut to the beginning. What was give me the origin of Mons Sana and the mission that you serve now?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on, brother. I really appreciate it. So Mons Sana is an evolution of a lot of things, and ultimately the word itself is Latin, rough translation, the mountain where I go to heal. And so here in Colorado in the Front Range, we ended up coming here because legislation allows the utilization of entheogenic medicines, plant-based medicines, as a part of a healing journey for folks. We considered other places, but none were as protected as being here in Colorado. So, and what that looks like, Mons Sana is a place where veterans, first responders, law enforcement, their family members can come and find safety, find love, find community. Those are the true human medicines. The entheogenic medicines that we utilize are simply catalysts and guides. We firmly believe that there is no treatment with these medicines. A lot of people are looking for a silver bullet or a magic pill, and there is no such thing. That is an illusion. What they do offer is guidance. They offer compressed timelines to allow people to find safety, to be able to tell their stories in safe places and be held through those unpackings and those evolutions. Ultimately, we all have everything that we need to find that deep healing within ourselves. Sometimes we've just forgotten how to get there.
So let's take a trip back in time. After your time in the Army, what was the timeline between leaving faithful and honorable service and your first experience with entheogenic plant-based medicine?
That was a long and circuitous path. I left military service in 1999, and like many, felt like a cardboard box full of puppies dropped behind a Walmart, and it's like, what do I do now? And so I struggled a lot to find myself, find my purpose. In the military, we were externally motivated, externally directed, right? And so I knew where I fit in. I'm old, so I was in the BDU Black Boot Army, and so you wear your rank on the BDUs. If you're an officer, your branch, you had your tabs on one side and your unit and your combat patch on the other sleeve, and then all your little HUA badges there. And so it was very quick to figure out kind of where you fit in the ecosystem when you came face to face with somebody. And every twice a month I got an LES, money went into the account. I had a raider, I had a senior raider. We always had a mission coming down. And so identity became what we did. Identity was more, what is my human doingness and not my human beingness, right? And until it wasn't. And then, okay, what the hell do I do now? And so, I took an entrepreneurial path that, I think I heard something, and I'll probably butcher this, but an entrepreneur is somebody that can survive enough failures until they actually find a success.
That is beyond accurate. As I like to say, it's the pursuit of running out of ways to fuck things up.
Or even a blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while. Right along that line too.
Well, dude, let me ask you this. I'm gonna pause you in the journey because there's there's that movie, The Founder, with Michael Keaton about Ray Kroc and McDonald's. Are you familiar?
A little bit. I saw it
Okay.
a while ago. Yeah.
There's a scene in that movie where he grabs a pile of dirt as the ships are burning and it's the world is crumbling around him, and he just says to himself, I just need to be right one time.
Yeah.
And he doubled down one more time. And as it plays out in the theatrics of the movie and all that, obviously McDonald's went on to become McDonald's.
Sure.
But there's like, I feel like did you have a moment like that in entrepreneurship?
I guess reflecting back there were some successes. There were also some doubling down on abysmal failures and all of the consequence that came from that. We have a saying, knowledge is what you gain when things go according to plan, and wisdom is what you gain when they don't.
Yeah.
And I ended up with a fuck ton of wisdom, I'll tell you.
So what were jump the lily pads with me really quick. What were some of those endeavors?
I went into real estate development straight out of the military, concurrently doing some volunteer work with veteran mental wellness and advocacy. And so the real estate run, I went into it wide open, doing some redevelopment work in Columbus, Georgia, right outside the front gate of Fort Benning, and had some movement. Things were going well, and then 9/11 happened and everything cratered. And so licked my wounds, tried to navigate up and through that, managed to get my equity partners made whole. But still, that left me scrambling, and went into some other real estate endeavors, did some historic property repositions and taking something that was dysfunctional and bringing some utility back into it. So learned a lot about construction, learned a lot about the whole process of going into something that already exists, not knowing what's behind the walls until after we tear it apart, and getting it wrong a lot. New construction is far easier. And then when 07 hit, and we had the implodometer, with the residential real estate market just collapsing, ended up just kind of surfing through that and helping people renegotiate their existing loans, workouts, things like that. There were, by this time we were in California, and there were a lot of Shylock organizations out there that were just taking people's money to do loan mods and not really doing anything for them. When California Department of Real Estate started cracking down on folks, there were a lot of people that went to jail. A lot of people that had big fines. When they came into our office, they said, gosh, you guys are actually, you're taking care of people. But that's not stuff that we could really profess, because a lot of the clientele we worked with, it was kind of like being a treatment center or a bankruptcy attorney. People don't necessarily want to go out and say these guys were great, because then they're admitting that they got themselves over leveraged. And so, I ended up with a cease and desist letter. There were only 3 of us in the whole state that ended up with a C&D letter. Everybody else got jail time or criminal prosecution or things like that. So, because they had to do something. And so we got the C&D, pivoted into buying vintage motorhomes and fixing them up to rent out. Thought that would be a great idea because we lived in Southern California at the time, and I would see like vintage Mustangs or Camaros going up and down Pacific Coast Highway, and people were renting them for a weekend just to have the experience. And I'm like, well, how cool would it be to have some of these iconic old vintage motorhomes from the 60s and 70s, like Revcons and ultra vans and things like that. How cool would it be to be able to go camp up and down the beach campsites on Pacific Coast Highway? Well, what I didn't take into account is people don't give a shit about what they rent. And so these poured all of this into these renovations, and people just thrashed them. And so that was an epic fail. In all of those things, I was still doing some, volunteer work, veteran advocacy work, getting really disgruntled with the pharmacologically based model that was not helping the problem. It was Band-Aids over bullet holes at best. And struggling with my own post-traumatic stress injuries. I like calling them PTSI, not PTSD, because it's an injury, it's not a disorder.
Sure.
It's something that's been inflicted.
Does that also make it a more resolvable issue in your mind's eye?
In my mind, it does, because disorder means that there's something wrong with the individual, that that somehow we did something wrong, or we're doing something wrong. When we're faced with traumatic situations, and the brain and the body are going to respond in a way that is adequate for survival. And so when we assimilate adaptive behaviors to survive, or if we've taken injury, well, it's not a disorder. It's not a malfunction. It's a system that's been overloaded, so we define trauma as a situation with which we are faced, for which we are not adequately prepared or resourced. Very simple. Situation with which we are faced for which we are not adequately prepared or resourced. I'll give you an example. If you're a firefighter and you've gone through firefighter 1, firefighter 2, EMS, and you get a call for a structure fire, and you put on your fireproof gear and your respirator, and you hop on your engine, and you get to that structure fire. Okay, you have been adequately prepared and resourced, so it's not traumatic. It's challenging. However, if you're a teenager riding your mountain bike home from the community pool in your board shorts, and you show up to a structure fire, and all you've got is a garden hose and a plastic sand bucket, that's traumatic, because you're not adequately prepared and resourced. And so when we face situations, and humans aren't necessarily designed to be in perpetual conflict. So when you look at the population we serve, either society or the nation has outsourced their trauma to the population we serve. First responders, law enforcement. Okay, when the populace has a challenge, they call 911. And so these folks show up to help resolve the traumatic situation. And so veteran or first responders, law enforcement are dealing with the distilled trauma of society. And our nation's warfighters are dealing with the outsourced trauma of the nation, because it's our interface with other nations. And so again, we're receiving a distilled version of that trauma, because we are put into situations that require conflict to resolve whatever our nation's needs and goals are at the time. And then the family members of those folks are dealing with vicarious trauma, because you can't just leave it at the office.
Mm-hmm.
And although we try to toggle between doing the thing and then going back home, and it works until the switch wears out, right?
Right. Well, I want to back up because I'm curious if this plays into your lived experience, in which the era that you served, then getting out in '99, and if we have anything in common, that integration, assimilation into civilian society isn't a switch that you flip. It's a years long transition. And then 9/11 happens. Was there a piece of you that was like, thank God I'm out? Or holy shit, why am I not still in? Like almost like a survivor's guilt kind of uh, post-service mentality. What end of the spectrum were you on, or is it the ever glorious somewhere in the middle?
It was in the middle, definitely leaning towards wanting to be in.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely struggled with it because I got out of the military to be more available for my family, for my kids,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and um, just the op tempo, and even when I was stateside, the jobs that I had, I wasn't, I was seeing them maybe one day every 2 weeks, and so that was really difficult,
Mm-hmm.
so I've got this, this conflicting um, loyalties, to doing the job that I had signed up for, and then when I was done with my commitment, okay, but I'd also brought these little humans into the world, and okay, what does that look like? Because I'm not in a place where I can do both well, and
Right.
so opted to be there with the humans. But then when this happened,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh crap, I heard the saber rattling, and it's okay. We need to go back, and even and even doing the advocacy work I was doing with veterans and volunteering and even with that, it didn't feel like it was enough. So I actually years later put together a packet to be reappointed to go back in as a civil affairs officer. But the
Mm-hmm.
particular year I dropped my packet, there were no officers reactivated, even though I had found a unit. They had a need. Um,
Wow.
the battalion commander of the units was in 8th grade when I had my last jump. I mean, it was, he was, and we were laughing. We were talking on the phone. He's like, I've never seen an LES or an OER. I've never seen an OER that was actually typed on a typewriter with a wet signature. This is pretty cool.
Wow. It's interesting. I've had a lot of conversations with my generation of veterans, and not this is the first in which I've gotten that perspective, and I really appreciate it. Somebody that was relatively fresh out, and then the moment that changed my generation's trajectory happened. um I can only imagine what goes through one's mind, especially with all the things that you just referenced in terms of the very noble choice to serve your family as husband and father, you know, and then, like, if there was anything that would justify coming back, it was 9/11. So, dude, that wow. Then when first of all, let me back up, because you made it a point to shift um, the terminology, and I don't want to. I know you enough to know that it's not about the semantics.
Mhm.
What is the difference between psychedelic and ethniogenic?
So from from my perspective and those that work with us who share the perspective, the word entheogenic means finding God within, or the catalyst to find God within. And, whereas psychedelic is more describing an effect. And so it that tends to align more with the concept that these medicines are a treatment, whereas entheogenic is more leans towards these medicines being a catalyst to help us go within and find healing.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so thank you for that clarity. When did that get introduced to you?
Well, first introduction was through the DARE program. Nancy Reagan, just say no. These little mushrooms will drive, you'll go insane, and all of that. And I took that hook, line, and sinker. The generation I grew up in. And in fact, that's part of what motivated my military service. I wanted to go in. I wanted to disrupt the drug trade. So I ended up serving on a special forces team as a comm sergeant for a minute before I took a green to gold scholarship and went back into the military as an infantry officer. But I was like, this stuff's bad, and I'm going to go and I'm going to fight the fight. I'm going to take down Pablo Escobar myself. But then after I left the military and I started working with veterans and with veteran nonprofits and doing some volunteer peer support and things like that, and wanting to make a difference, what I saw were guys were getting out and they were struggling, and they'd go to the VA and they'd walk out with their shopping bag full of pharma, what I later came to name the polypharmaceutical lobotomy. Because you're on SSRIs, SNRIs, benzos, Doras, and it wasn't doing any good. All it was doing is at best numbing the pain, at worst increasing the pain, and the suicide rate tick 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 tick. And so and then I had heard, by this time we were living in Southern California, and I had heard about a guy up in Oregon that was, and let me back up a little bit. So late 90s, early 2000s, late 90s I got out, early 2000s, Oxycontin was starting to be handed out. And then by 2009, 10, 11, 12, it was handed out like Skittles at the VA, on active duty too, but definitely at the VA. And so, Oxycontin is an synthetic opiate derivative stacked with a synthetic codeine derivative. What could go wrong when you've got two synthetic dopamine analogs that are stacked on top of each other without any of the checks and balances that exist in plant medicines? Even if you look at the Vietnam veterans that came back from Vietnam addicted to morphine was still primarily plant derived. And so there were still minor alkaloids in the morphine that acted as a bit of a check and balance. I'm not saying that morphine was wonderful and amazing. It was still very highly addictive, but not like the synthetic derivatives.
Right.
And the body could hit homeostasis with morphine. Now, it might be enough to knock out a mule, but these guys could function. That went away with Oxycontin. And so when I saw this happening over and over, guys go to the VA, get your shopping bag full, and the Klonopin and the Wellbutrin and the Paxil and all of that are numbing me out. I can take an oxy, I can feel okay, my body feels okay, and I sleep at night. And so I'm not waking up with night terrors. And it worked until it didn't, because of because neurochemistry would change. And so I saw this, and it's like, there's got to be a solution to this. And so then I started, I put my own preconceptions aside and started researching. And there was a guy up in Oregon who was helping veterans wean off of opiates, because what we saw over and over again, go to the VA, get your oxy, and tolerance goes up. And so prescription needs to go up, and then the VA would cut people off and say, okay, that's your max. They'd start scoring oxy on the street, $8 to $10 a pill, then figure out a tar ball of heroin was a quarter the price. So then they'd start shooting. And it was a large Marine population where we were at in Southern California. And so there was still that discipline that came from that military service. And so they were holding it together until they weren't. And then even then, the methadone clinics weren't interested in helping people titrate or taper off. They were just interested in putting butts in chairs. And and they liked the military patients because they were compliant. They showed them in the right place at the right time in the right uniform. And so I saw veterans being turned into fiscal batteries to support these clinics. And the only difference was, okay, it was a nicer place to go do your drugs, and maybe there wasn't quite the euphoria. So there were a lot of things that were coming at me all at once that didn't feel like the best interest of the veteran was truly being held. And so there's a guy up in Oregon that was taking heroin addicted veterans or opiate addicted veterans and getting them off, and he was using cannabis to do it. So he bought a little roadside motel, bulletproofed the rooms. It's like, all right, we're gonna, we'll bring food to you twice a day. You can have all the cannabis products you could possibly consume, and you're gonna cold turkey this thing, but with the support of the cannabis. And it was working, at least better than the methadone clinics.
Sure.
Yeah, he was having about a 50% success rate, which in addiction is huge.
Right.
Typical recidivism is somewhere between 90 and 92% with standard methodologies, and that's considered the front line of care. And so that made me go, And so then I started doing the deep dive and found a lot of the research around cannabis that's actually neuroprotective and not neurodegenerative, and when it's used therapeutically, it can actually be beneficial and provide some scaffolding while people are stepping off of synthetic pharmaceuticals, and the fact that we have an endocannabinoid system in our body, and only 20% of MDs and DOs even knew back then, maybe the number's bigger now, knew that we had an endocannabinoid system in our body, or that mothers produce cannabinoids in their breast milk. That's why babies chill out after they nurse, is because
shit.
Yeah. So baby gets milk drunk. No, their endocannabinoid system has been filled. CB1 and CB2 receptors have been touched, and it's like, okay, they can relax. And so really it helps to regulate a baby's nervous system. So with our scientific method, when we look at changing one variable and looking at an outcome, we sometimes miss the forest for the trees when we're going through that kind of a process. Because just like even a baby nursing, so there's the endocannabinoid system activation. There's also the nervous system co-regulation. There's the nourishment. There are all of these things that are happening concurrently. So we need to look at things more as systems, I believe, instead of just looking at individual things. And that's really been the approach that we've taken, with the work that we do. So I know we've kind of wandered off and back, but.
Yeah. So you do this research, find this guy up there in Oregon that's changing lives. He's taking the recidivism rate from 90 plus down to 50% through using cannabis.
And it was off book. I mean,
of course.
This is 2009, 2010 timeframe. You've got a level of permissiveness in California. California, was leading with the decriminalization of cannabis. Oregon wasn't there legislatively yet, but it was like, go do what you want.
Victimless crime kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And so that really started me down a path, and that put me on a path of realizing that I wanted to be involved in this healing space. I just didn't want to follow a pharmacologically based program to get there. Back then, my war cry was, I'm not going to sacrifice my soul on the altar of big pharma just to get some letters after my name. And that was there are some incredible providers out there, and so it's not throwing shade on them as individuals, it's more throwing shade on an institution that is so entrenched in pharma as the only answer, and the programming that's come from that, and you go back to the quote by John D. Rockefeller of cure a patient, lose a customer. Well, that really rubbed me the wrong way, and so I'm like, we were able to find healing for tens of thousands of years before big pharma popped up, which by and large takes some kind of an alkaloid chain or some kind of a molecular structure out of a plant, hangs a petroleum group on it, now calls it a novel medicine and sells it, but then completely discounts the benefit of the natural medicines. That felt not real good.
Can you connect the dots for me? If it's not speaking out of school or out of scope for you, and connect the dots between petroleum and pharma, because I don't think that was news to me very recently that those two industries are joined at the hip.
So back in the day, you had families that wielded a lot of power and control. Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, DuPonts, Hearsts. So you had those groups that wanted to continue to assimilate power, control, money, and you. So if we go back and look at hemp as a crop, so back when we were colonies, there was a requirement to grow a certain amount of hemp because hemp was used to make paper, it was used to make fabric, it was used to make sails for sailing ships. And when we come into the turn of the last century, the turn of the early 1900s, hemp outproduced timber 5-to-1, acre for acre over a 20-year period of time when it came to making fiber. And so you had pulp and paper mills that were, a lot of the newspapers were owned by some of these families, the Hearst family and others, and they had big timber holdings. Well, hemp was out producing. And then also there were innovations to where hemp seed oil could be used as a fuel and biofuel. I mean, we're just now kind of rediscovering those things. But, the Cummins diesel engine, when it was first invented, was invented to run on hemp seed oil, not to run on petroleum. Okay. Well, so that starts threatening oil holdings. And then you've got, Henry Ford had prototypes where he used hemp fiber composite body panels on early prototypes of automobiles. So that challenges the steel industry. And so you've got a renewable resource. And the other part is hemp does not require chemical fertilizer. It puts more into the soil than it takes out. Does not require pesticides, does not require herbicides. And so because hemp grows very dense and it replenishes the soil, so the chemical companies preferred cotton because cotton is a very fickle little plant. It needs a lot of fertilizer, it needs a lot of pesticides, it needs a lot of herbicides. Hemp does not. And so a family of 6 could be well maintained on a 5-acre hemp farm. I mean, there was enough that was generated from there to support them to have a lower middle class living.
And let me, so a lot of folks will argue that things like that find a place to die on the economic vine because they're great in a micro community, a 5-acre plot. But is that also true? I'm just being devil's advocate here because I don't know nothing about nothing. It sounds like it was proof positive at scale and they still turned away from it. Is that it?
it competed with products that were being rolled forward that were petroleum based, chemically based. And so you've got a crop that does not need DuPont chemicals, does not need fertilizer, does not need herbicide, does not need pesticide.
All the things that are already adjacent to petroleum production as a fuel.
Correct.
The byproducts industry. Right. Okay.
The byproducts industry. And so then there was something else that came out called nylon. So nylon was a petroleum byproduct, but nylon could not compete with canvas. And you've got a middle class that's starting to grow, which means that there's pressure on those that are trying to control the population, the masses. Mm-hmm. And so and then you've got a medicine. So if you look in the Americana Pharmacopoeia, you've got cannabis derivative products that were all through the Americana Pharmacopoeia until 1933. And so you had elixirs, you had poultices, you had tonics, you had things, and cannabis was used to treat epileptic seizures. Cannabis was used to treat domestic abuse, alcoholism, and it was used for swelling. The poultices were used for swelling. So it was in a lot of the medicines that we as a populace were using. Mm-hmm. Well, those also competed with these new pharmacologically based medicines, the innovations, the injected medicines instead of things that have been used. And so there was a campaign created to turn people against natural solutions because you couldn't patent those. Mm-hmm. and you couldn't control the price. And so you had two competing things that all came from the same plant group. Mm-hmm. And so there were attempts to discredit cannabis medicine, cannabis medicines or cannabis derived medicines.
The Reefer Madness campaign and all of that.
Well, and the thing about Reefer Madness, when Reefer Madness was filmed, it was filmed as a spoof. It was kind of like Saturday Night Live or Monty Python back in the day. Right. And so it was this thing and ha ha ha. But then you had Adslinger, who was our first drug czar, who approached the folks that made the movie and said, "Thank you for making this documentary." And they're like, "No, this is this is
satire. This is satire."
So no, this is a documentary, isn't it? Do you want to see your family? This is a documentary, isn't it? Thank you for serving your government.
Wow. Right? Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
And so, Adslinger, he was like P.T. Barnum. He was a showman. He was an orator, mm-hmm. and he said things like, if the monster Frankenstein himself saw cannabis, he'd turn around and run in fright. and he also made some very racist comments in front of Congress mm-hmm. When he was lobbying against it. And they even took cannabis that had been in the Americana Pharmacopoeia and renamed it marijuana. Okay, so even though that it had been called that in Mexico, Spirit of Mary, and that goes back to some of the missionary efforts by the Catholic Church down into Mexico and Central and South America. But so they brought this new novel name forward and said this devil weed is being brought across the border, during the Depression, to be able to blame mm-hmm. the Depression on people that were trying to come across the border to escape genocide. And
interesting.
So it was deflection. It was blame game. Mm-hmm. It was blaming this devil weed. All the while, it was to maneuver public opinion away from a plant-based medicine. Mm-hmm. And so, and even so, cannabis, even though alcohol was prohibited, they tried mm-hmm. to get cannabis prohibited, and they couldn't get cannabis prohibition passed. So what they were finally able to do in the early 30s was to pass the marijuana excise tax, which meant that any product that had cannabis in it was taxed at 100%. And so when it was taxed at 100% and petroleum-based pharma was priced at a lower point, the manufacturers ended up tacking away from using cannabis in their products.
Yep.
And then they were able to finally get it prohibited.
Interesting.
And when they got it prohibited, they prohibited cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and cannabis rubera, which was hemp. So they backdoored in to get rid of the largest cash crop that was on track to be $1 billion crop in the United States in the early 1900s.
So the money maker, as far as the crop and the plant is concerned, isn't even the medicine end of its utilization. It's all the functional products, the wind sails, the industrial products that really made all the money, but they used the reefer madness visualization to put it under one big umbrella.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow. Holy shit. That's crazy.
Well, so because if you look, the Declaration of Independence written on hemp paper, the original dungarees or blue jeans by Levi Strauss made out of hemp. You have the Cummins diesel engine that was originally designed to run on hemp oil. You've got Ford, who was experimenting with hemp carbon fiber or its hemp fiber body panels. So so when you look, and each one of those was encroaching on a well-seated industry that didn't want to give up any market share.
Yeah. Damn. Okay. So how do we get, thank you for the history lesson. That was, holy shit, extremely enlightening. How do we get from marijuana as an aid to to disconnect us from chemical dependency to the introduction of entheogenic medicine, and not only disconnecting from chemical dependency from in the pharmacological sense, but also resolving issues like PTSD?
So for my path, even though I was working with cannabis, I still had a lot of my own shit that I was dealing with. I had complex PTSD or PTSI. I had PTSI. I had traumatic brain injuries from my military service, and I had something that's only recently come into a more a broader awareness, and that was moral injury. And so moral injury, is a betrayal wound. And so, simple terms is it's a betrayal by tribe when we get down to it. So, Litz and some of the other guys have a little more eloquent definition of it, but ultimately it's when we're called upon to do something or we witness something that falls out of line with our own moral compass or scales. And then the guilt and the shame and everything that comes from that. But then if we tug on that a little further, many times that's not our first moral injury. Our first moral injury comes from our tribe of origin. There's an implicit expectation when we parachute into this human existence that the parents that brought us into it are going to provide safety. They're going to provide care because we're helpless, little poopy, little beings that can't support themselves.
Right.
And so there's an implicit expectation we're going to have a soft landing. And when we come ripping into a dumpster fire, and that's our origin,
right.
And then we start looking at what the baseline is around us, and we realize, oh shit, I got the short end of the stick here. And so, and we don't necessarily at that point have all of the cognitive thought and the adaptive responses and all of that. So we start building those to just survive the dumpster fire.
you are under-resourced at the onset, which exacerbates the development of survival mechanisms.
Yeah, 100%. You look around for the available tools on the tool bench, and that's what you grab, and that's what you use to survive. And so then there are personality traits, there are adaptive behaviors, there are those survival mechanisms that are put in place. There's a difference between survive and thrive, but when those lock in, and some of those behaviors end up being appealing to the military. If you can dissociate, if you can do those things that are beneficial to the accomplishment of the mission, but not necessarily in the best interest of the executor of those behaviors, well, you get used up and then tossed aside, because the machine keeps moving. So so not knowing that it was moral injury, one of the things I was struggling with, and so what do we do when we've got this pain, these things that are, the disconnect between our reptilian brain and our prefrontal cortex, right? So you've got your amygdala, your thalamus and your hippocampus together making up your reptilian brain. And then you've got the cauliflower on top, which is your cortex, and the prefrontal cortex up front that has your higher function, your executive function, your moral scales, and all of that. So you've got the survival brain fighting with the strategic and moral brain, right? And the challenge is that the prefrontal cortex only controls 10 to 15% of what we do any given day. The other 85 to 90% is run by the reptilian brain,
right?
And the reptilian brain moves us forward by looking in a rear view mirror. What have I done to get here? I'm going to keep doing that.
Pattern recognition,
right? And so the prefrontal's like, no, but that's not right, and that's not going to get us to our end states. And your reptilian brain says, fuck off. This is what we've done to survive. We're going to keep doing that. And so that disconnect is what creates the guilt, the shame, the oh my God, I'm self-sabotaging, and really it's not understanding how to reprogram that part. And sometimes, we've got physical disconnection. Sometimes we've gone through emotional things and parts of our brain downregulate to where we can't, there's not an adequate connection there. And so, and I was experiencing all of that without necessarily knowing what was going on. And so one of my survival tools was alcohol, because it's readily available, socially acceptable. And I struggled with that on and off for years, and because I came to recognize that it was a survival tool, because it eased the pain enough for me to wake up the next day. And so when we get to a place of, some of the things that I did as a result of that really sucked, but those were things done. That's not who I was at my core, and being able to find that forgiveness of self, seek forgiveness of others. That was part of the healing path, but sometimes we need a catalyst. And so that's where the entheogens come in. Cannabis can provide some support. It can help with physical pain. It can help sometimes unlock really rigid, stuck thought processes and patterns. And it can help the autonomic nervous system get out of being stuck in sympathetic response and hypervigilance. And we saw that with some of the folks that we worked with cannabis. They would medicate prior to going into a therapy or a counseling session. It's slowed, because opiates will tend to put you in a hypervigilant state, and we go straight from the freeze is always the first response in the sympathetic nervous response. Your breath freezes, even if it's just for a second. You think before you throw a punch, before you push a rep, before you pull a trigger, you see a name pop up on your phone, right? You're going to hold, and when you hold that breath, it fires cortisol, it fires adrenaline, a lot of other things happen in the system to put you into that sympathetic response, right?
Right.
And some of us get stuck there because we never had a place where we felt safe enough to rest, digest, and restore. And so we run until we pass out, until the biological vehicle just shuts down. And
Right.
then, okay, we can get enough, but then we come awake and we're back at it again.
Mm-hmm.
What we found with cannabis used, in a setting where it was used therapeutically, is it started bringing people into a more balanced state. So instead of launching straight into a fight response, there was a pause. There was a beat, and in that beat, then going with some EFT, and go in with some CBT, and go in with exposure therapy, and start unpacking those things. So that was kind of the beginning, and even so, even working in that space, coming up through a naturopathic route towards being able to do work in more functional medicine from a naturopath standpoint, and all of the courses, as part of my quest for my new identity. I was maneuvering and got to the point where it's like, okay, there's got to be something that's got a little more horsepower to it, because this takes a long time. And then
That's such a good segue into the experience. There's got to be something that has a little more horsepower to it. Hands down, the understatement of the century with regards to the experience. Yeah, because in my own lived experience, it's the difference between taking the horse and buggy and getting on something the SpaceX just put out there.
Yeah.
Horsepower is very much an understatement.
There are many paths up the mountain, some a little more expedient than others. And but at least working with the cannabis, so that allowed me to start challenging narratives. It's like, okay, this is interesting. Nancy Reagan lied to me. Don't think it was intentional. Just and so let's go a little deeper. So then I started exploring ketamine, because okay, well, I want to be involved in a space where I'm helping people. Ketamine was kind of the one that got away, if you will, because it was it was already well used. There was documented use of it, as in Vietnam, people had higher survivability rates when they went through physical trauma than morphine, because it doesn't, ketamine doesn't suppress heart or lung function like morphine can, right? And so, but then, there was a study. So folks had been using ketamine underground, and then there was a study, I believe, from Yale in the 90s. And so I was like, oh, okay. And even EMTs and first responders knew, if you hit somebody with a relatively low dose of ketamine, to where it's not a full anesthetic effect, but more, it would calm people down.
Down regulation.
Yeah. And so then, we started seeing ketamine start to be used for mental wellness. And it's like, there might be something here. And so then I started going down that rabbit trail of, okay, I was planning to open a ketamine clinic, but not exclusively ketamine. I was looking for non-pharma solutions that could be stacked together in a multimodal, non-contraindicated way. And so did a lot of deep research into hyperbaric oxygen therapy, into transcranial magnetic stimulation, into vibroacoustic sound therapy, into stroboscopic light therapy, and also things like oxytocin and lymphatic drainage, from vibrating fitness plates. So develop this protocol of, okay, what if we stack all of these things together and compress them? Can we compress healing timelines? And so I knew that I had gaps in knowledge around ketamine. And so a MAPS conference came up, and Phil Wolfson, who is the OG of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, was running an intensive prior to the MAPS conference. So I said, okay, I'm going to go, because I need to fill in these gaps of knowledge, before I opened this clinic. Still struggling with my own challenges. I was, definitely way up there in my alcohol addiction during this time, but the whole mindset of I'll save everybody else while I sit and struggle, and so
Right.
definitely some victim mindset there. And
Sure.
but I'll save everybody else. No, you go ahead. All of that shit that we sometimes play in our minds. And so in my mindset, it was all right. I'm gonna go. Maps. What is maps? All right, this is some hippy dippy drum circle, whatever. But I'll navigate my way through that. Go get my information and leave. But when I got there, and I went out on the exhibit floor, and I saw a very significant veteran presence there, and I kind of felt like getting out the door late on a jump and being way past the DZ and landing in the trees and cutting brush and then coming into a clearing and finding unit patches. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm not lost anymore. It was that kind of a feeling.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay, there's more here. And there's tribe here. Guys that have cut the brush and come here. And there's something here. So again, I suspended my judgments and started doing the deep dive. And then soon after, I was invited to an organization to do my own healing. And initially, it was like, all right, I'll get on your list, and maybe I'll go to check out, where I might send people if they don't respond well to the ketamine therapy. Again, it was I don't really need that, but then when I went,
a little bit of a savior complex there.
More than a little bit, yeah, and I'll own it, yeah, sure, but then when I went through, everything changed radically, and their particular protocol was very robust. That what we were given a strain of psilocybin mushrooms that was about 3x an albino penis envy. So we got the equivalent of about 12 grams. That was my first time ever sitting with psilocybin. And and then a day break, and then 2 rounds of bufo, 80 milligrams a pop of bufo. And so that was the slingshot into the universe.
That's a good time.
Sure.
So, dude, I what a ride, man. Oh my gosh. I guess where I want to plant our flag today in this conversation before we close the loop. What is it about the experience, to use your word, that creates the horsepower, right? On the other side of that experience, to sever the tie between chemical addiction, to course correct our patterns and behaviors, all the things that we hear about in the entheogenic experience as a result of those experiences. Advocate for it. How does it work? How are all of those results possible where what do you call it? Allopathic medicine either takes the long road or fails to succeed at all?
The major belief system in allopathic medicine is that the medicine is the cure. And so it's externalizing your healing.
Hence the dependency.
So if we externalize our healing, then we don't have to take responsibility for our healing when you get down to it.
So
the medicine didn't work.
So you're also, with the best of intentions, assumed you're also giving away your agency.
100%.
Okay. Yeah. Keep going. I'll stop interrupting.
Yeah, no. So our view is, these medicines unlock doors, but we have to be the ones to step through it.
Mhm.
And one of the metaphors that I use a lot that I feel like really captures this well is, if you view your psyche like a piece of metal,
Mhm.
every peak emotional experience we go through warms up the metal. And then the metal is malleable after that peak emotional experience. So then it gets molded into a shape to help us navigate that peak emotional experience and move forward. But then when the metal cools, now it's in that shape. And so it takes another peak emotional experience to create the malleability for it to shift. So now you can cold forge metal. Okay, you can hammer the shit out of a piece of metal on an anvil. It's noisy, takes a lot of effort, and takes time, but it can change shape.
Mhm.
Or you can put it into a furnace, which is a peak emotional experience, and it's easier to mold. And
Mhm.
so like if you see somebody that's got a that went through a tough time, leaned into alcohol as the tool. Okay, that tough time passes, alcohol's still there, and it stays there. It's like, oh, I should quit. And I know this really isn't good for me. It's not until there's a DUI or divorce papers or a diagnosis, then suddenly, okay, I've got to do something different. So we look around for available tools on the tool bench and pick them up. So it might be CrossFit, it might be veganism, it might be, something else. We might find faith, whatever the case is, and then things cool down, and then that becomes the new tool. So
Mhm.
what entheogenic medicines are like a furnace. And so now we can take that piece of metal and put it in the furnace and it comes out white hot. Now, some people will say, well, holy shit, this thing's white hot. It'll cut through anything. And they don't actually lay it on the anvil and forge it, right? And so then it cools off. It's like, oh shit, I got to go back and do some more medicine to heat it back up. But if you're in a forge and you put a piece of metal into the furnace, if you don't hammer it into the shape that it
Mhm.
needs to be, it's just going to cool off and be a shittier version of the metal you started with. Okay. So it's the forging process. It's hammering it while it's on the anvil into the shape that you need it. And that hammering is integration. So the medicine heats us up. It's the integration that creates the lasting change, because the integration is hammering the malleable metal of our psyche into a more optimal tool.
What an incredible analogy, dude. Dr. Lance, everybody. So where can everybody find you? Where can they glean knowledge from you? Where can they have the Mons Sana experience?
So we've got a little one-page landing page at www.monsana.com. You can put your information in there. We'll reach out and connect with you. I'm also on LinkedIn, Lance Cutsforth. And as far as where this occurs, we're here in Colorado. We're in the Front Range, about an hour 20 from the Denver airport. We run healing retreats about every other month. It's actually it's a 3-month program. It's a 12-week program with 6 days in person. We've got pre-retreat work, and then we do very robust post-retreat integration. It's a 9-week program to hammer that malleable metal of the psyche into your chosen optimal state. We don't dictate what your optimal state looks like. We guide and support, mainly because we want you to have your sovereignty, your agency,
Mhm.
um, and then you can't blame us, right?
Brother, I'm so grateful to have you in my circle. I am just honored to share time and space with you and use this as a megaphone for the Mons Sana mission. I'm truly grateful for what you're bringing to the first responder veteran community and beyond. Absolutely incredible. If you're in that space and need that furnace, that forge for healing, reach out to Dr. Lance and Mons Sana and see what's available to you. For everybody out there on a mission to be the fittest leader possible, remember, it comes down to integrity, courage, and ownership laid on the foundation of alignment first. We'll see you next time.